Greetings.
Part 2, The First Gun. She came through Camp Narache on a late summer evening, when the heat of the day was finally releasing its grip on the land, rising off the red stone formations in visible waves that distorted the distance and made the southern hills look as though they were breathing. The communal fire had been going since late afternoon. It went earlier in summer, when people finished their work while there was still light and gathered to eat and talk in the long golden hours before dark. And most of the settlement was there or nearby when the sound of movement in the grass on the eastern approach brought heads around. Braka Windtrail came through the settlement's edge with the unhurried directness of someone who had visited before and knew exactly where the fire was, and saw no reason to make an event of arriving. She was older than Can's mother, her dark fur carrying serious grey at the muzzle and above the eyes, her face marked in the understated way of someone who had spent decades in the field. Not the proud scars of a warrior collecting history, but the accumulated small record of 1,000 encounters with things that had edges or thorns, or the kind of sudden motion that even considerable experience did not always predict. She moved without a wasted step, each placement deliberate in the way that had long since passed below conscious direction, and become simply how a body moved when it had been paying attention for long enough. She wore leather armor that had been repaired in multiple places with slightly different materials. The honest patchwork of something maintained rather than replaced, each repair its own small story about a day she didn't explain. She carried a hunting rifle across her back alongside her pack, the weapon maintained to a standard that matched her armor. Not precious, not neglected, a tool in the hands of someone who understood that tools were only as good as the care given them. And at her left side walked the cat. The cat's name was Dusk, though Camp Narache did not know this yet. She was large, genuinely, substantially large, the kind of size that registered before any other detail, the body long and deep-chested, the shoulders moving with the smooth articulation of something built for exactly this. Moving through the world at the side of a specific person, reading the world independently, covering the angles her companion could not cover. Her coat was tawny with darker markings along the shoulders and flanks, each marking shifting as the muscles beneath moved, and her eyes were amber and operated with a deliberate independence, not following Braka's gaze, but running their own circuit of the settlement's edges, the structures, the gathered people, the spaces between everything, with the thoroughness of an animal that had learned to treat careful observation as survival rather than preference. She moved alongside Braka in the way that water moves alongside the bank that shapes it, not following, not being led, simply occupying the same direction with the complete ease of two things that had been moving together for long enough to have developed a shared language of motion that required no negotiation and no commands. The settlement noticed them. Of course it did. Camp Narache was a noisy, attentive community of people who knew each other entirely, and therefore found strangers genuinely interesting. And a hunter arriving with a mountain cat at her side was not nothing, not in a craftspeople's village, where the largest animals most people encountered regularly were kodos and plainstriders. Children who had been chasing each other between the structures stopped and reformed into a cluster at what they collectively determined was the appropriate distance. Two of the older hunters near the fire straightened without appearing to straighten, the subtle attention of people who were assessing whether the situation required anything from them and concluding that it did not. Braka found an empty space at the fire and sat without fuss and accepted the bowl that Roke, who had been feeding travellers at this fire, for longer than most of the settlement had been alive, and had reduced the hospitality to pure reflex, brought her, and began eating with the focused efficiency of someone who treated food as fuel, and was grateful for it without requiring the gratitude to be witnessed. Dusk settled at Braka's left side, and watched the settlement with her amber eyes. Tamer was sitting 3 people to Can's right, which was close enough that he heard her clearly when she said, not quietly, because Tamer had very few quiet registers, to the older female hunter sitting beside her. Look at them. Look at how they move together. The older hunter made a non-committal sound that suggested she had already observed this and did not feel the need to discuss it. That cat does not follow that hunter, Tamer said, with the pressing conviction of someone who needed what she'd noticed acknowledged out loud. They are the same thing walking in 2 bodies. The cat reads the edges and the hunter reads the center, and between them nothing is missed. She paused and then said, with Tamer's characteristic way of arriving at a destination that the rest of the sentence had only been approaching. "I have never seen anything like that before." "Have you?" The older hunter said that yes, she had seen it once or twice, among hunters who had spent many years with a single companion. "How?" Tamer asked. "How does it get like that?" The older hunter said she did not know exactly, that it was something that grew between them over time. Tamer considered this. Then she said, "I wonder if you can learn it or if you are born already able to do it and just need to find the right companion." The older hunter had no answer for this, which did not particularly slow Tamer down. Can was sitting at the fire's edge with the stillness that was his nature, and he heard all of this, and he felt something settle in him that had not previously been settled. The thing he had been watching without having words for it suddenly named, in public, by a 13-year-old who had no idea she was doing it specifically for him. He looked at Dusk and Braka, and he looked at what Tamer had described, and he understood, in the way that things become understood when someone else finds the right words for what you have already been experiencing, that this was what he wanted. Not a companion animal, not a trained beast. This two things, one awareness, nothing missed. He looked at Dusk, who was at that moment looking at him. Braka told stories after the meal, because this was the understood exchange. The community's hospitality paid for in the currency of whatever a traveller carried that the community did not have, and what Braka carried was experience, and experience told well was its own kind of gift. She told them the way experienced people told things that had happened to them. Plainly, in sequence, the details that made them true rather than the embellishments that made them entertaining. She had been a hunter for more years than most of the people at the fire had been alive, and her stories had been pared down by time to what was actually there, all the performance long since removed. She told them about the time a wounded raptor had led her a full day's walk in the wrong direction through the barrens, before she understood the animal was not fleeing from her, but drawing her away from something. She described the moment of understanding, how it arrived not as a sudden revelation, but as the accumulation of small wrongnesses that she had been registering without fully processing, the way the raptor periodically checked her position, the consistency of the leading that was too regular to be random panic. She had doubled back and found the nest. 3 eggs, 2 already hatched, the hatchlings old enough to be in genuine danger from the predators that had been following the sound of the fight. The raptor had been not fleeing but protecting, using her as a tool, which meant the raptor understood she was a threat that could be redirected. A level of situational intelligence she had not expected from a wounded animal managing pain while executing a deliberate strategy. She told them about the kind of silence that preceded an ambush in open terrain, different from ordinary silence, in a way she had only learned to recognize by surviving the encounter where she had not recognized it in time. She described the difference with the precision of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about it. Ordinary silence was the absence of sound. Pre-ambush silence was the absence of specific sounds that should have been there, the sounds that small creatures made when they were not actively avoiding something nearby. The difference was subtle enough that she had missed it once and had spent a long time afterward making sure she would not miss it again. The fire made its sounds. The settlement listened with the genuine attention that good stories earned. Dusk's amber eyes made their patient circuit of the edges, reading everything, missing nothing, returning periodically to Can with the consistency of a compass returning to north. He stayed after most of the settlement had gone inside. This was not unusual for him. He had always been among the last at the evening fire, comfortable in the later hours when the gathering thinned and the conversation became more specific. But tonight, he was aware of staying with a particular purpose, though he could not have named it precisely. He was watching something that had not finished revealing itself. Tamer stayed too, because when Can stayed, she generally stayed, pulling a blanket around her shoulders and sitting with the patience she reserved for things she found genuinely interesting. She did not say anything for a long while, which was one of her more useful capabilities. At some point in the later hours, Braka became aware of his presence with the sudden completeness of someone who had known it was there, and had been deciding when to address it. She looked at him directly for the first time, a long, unhurried assessment that had nothing hostile in it, the frank attention of someone reading a material to determine its nature. She said, "You have been watching Dusk more than you have been watching me." Dusk, he said, finding the name in his mouth before he had registered hearing it used. Then she has been watching me. The corner of Braka's mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but belonged to the same family. Yes, she said. She has. He looked at Dusk, who was at that moment regarding him with the amber-eyed patience she brought to everything, and said, Why? Braka took a moment with it, the question landing as one she actually wanted to answer well. Because you are still, she said. Most people who come to a fire like this are full of themselves, their hunger, their warmth, their wanting to be seen and heard and acknowledged. You came to observe. You have been observing all evening, with an attention that living things recognize as genuine rather than performed. Dusk notices the difference between someone looking at her and someone seeing her. She does not extend herself toward the ones who are only looking. He sat with this. He said, I have been watching how you move together. You cover the space around you without directing each other. She reads what you do not read, and you read what she does not read. Yes. How long did it take? Braka looked at Dusk for a moment. We have been together since she was young, she said. Before that question has an honest answer. She paused for a moment, and the fire made its sounds, and the settlement was quiet around them. Then she said, the bond is not something you build. It grows. You cannot construct it from the outside, or manufacture it through technique or strategy. You can only make yourself the kind of ground it is capable of growing in, which means being consistently what you are, without performance, without agenda, patient enough to let it grow at its own pace, rather than the pace you would prefer. And then it either grows or it does not, and if it does not, you have still become a more honest version of yourself, which is worth the attempt regardless. She gave him the same unhurried read she'd been giving him since she first noticed he wasn't leaving. How old are you? She asked. 15, he said. She nodded once slowly, with the air of someone confirming a calculation. Then she said nothing more that evening and went to sleep, and he sat at the dying fire for a while longer, turning everything over, and Tamer sat beside him in her blanket and was unusually quiet until she said, soft enough that it was only for him, She is going to teach you something. I can tell. He said she is planning to leave tomorrow. Tamer pulled the blanket tighter and looked at the dark where Braka and Dusk had settled. That was before tonight, she said. Go to sleep, Can. He did not go to sleep for a long time. He was at the river before dawn. He had not decided to go earlier than usual. He simply woke in the grey dark before first light with the particular alertness of someone whose mind had been working while the rest of him rested, and found that lying still was no longer useful, and got up and went to the place he always went when the world required thinking. The river in late summer ran lower than its spring volume, the current quieter, the banks wider where the receded water had left dry gravel. The stones were cool under his feet, and the air carried the first suggestion of the autumn that was still weeks away. Not cold, but less assertively warm, as if the season were beginning to ask questions about its own continuation. He sat on his stone and looked at the water. He became aware of Braka's presence upstream before he saw her. The birds on the near bank had adjusted, the way birds adjusted when something large and deliberate was moving nearby. And then Braka was there, crouched at the water's edge perhaps 15 yards upstream, attending to the river as he did himself. Dusk beside her with one paw resting on the surface in the way of a large animal, feeling the current's temperature and movement. He did not speak her. She did not speak her. The river ran between them and the light came slowly into the world. After a while Braka said, still looking at the water, "There is a good trout holding behind that submerged stone. Has been there since I sat down. He knows we are here and has decided we are not worth moving for." Can looked. He found the fish, the slight displacement in the current's pattern that indicated a body resting in the flow. He had not identified it immediately, which told him Braka's water reading was more advanced than his own, which told him something about the depth of knowledge available on the other side of where he currently was. He has been there for an hour, Can said. He feeds when the light reaches a certain angle. Another 40 minutes. Braka looked at him, then back at the fish. Then she said nothing for 40 minutes. The fish fed at the angle Can had indicated. Braka looked at him with the same frank read she'd given him the evening before. "That is not something most 15-year-old calves know," she said. "I have been watching this river since I was small," he said. She nodded slowly, not at what he had said, but at something she had decided about what it meant. Then Dusk moved. She rose from her position beside Braka without any visible decision preceding the movement, simply present in one position, and then moving toward Can with the unhurried deliberateness of something that had made up its mind and saw no reason to rush the execution. Can sat very still, not from caution, but from the instinct that stillness was the correct response, that any adjustment he made would be an imposition on whatever Dusk was choosing to do. She covered the 15 yards between them and stopped beside him. She was closer than she had been at any point since their arrival. He could see the individual hairs of her coat in the early light, the way the darker markings on her shoulders shifted as she breathed. Her eyes at this proximity, a different amber than firelight had shown him, richer, more complex, a color that held depth rather than simply reflecting it. He could feel the warmth radiating from her body even without contact, the heat of a large animal in good health, substantial and real. She looked at the river. He looked at the river. Then she turned her head toward him, and then, with the complete, unhurried deliberateness that characterized everything she did, she pressed the side of her head against his shoulder. The weight of it was real. Not tentative, not exploratory, a genuine lean, the full side of her skull against the top of his arm with a pressure that was both comfortable and unmistakable. He felt the vibration of something deep in her chest that was not quite a purr, but was in the same register as a purr, lower and slower, the sound of a large engine at idle. His hand moved without his deciding to move it. It went into the fur at the side of her neck, which was dense and warm, and carried the specific texture of something that lived outdoors in all conditions, and he felt the lean increase slightly in response. A fractional additional pressure of her skull against his shoulder, the acknowledgement of acknowledged contact. He sat beside a mountain cat at the edge of the river in the early morning light, her weight against him, her warmth, the deep idle engine sound she made, and felt something in him go quiet in a way that was new, not his ordinary stillness but something closer to arrival. They sat this way for some time. He was not aware of Braka watching from upstream until much later, when he turned to find her still at her position, not at the water anymore but facing him and Dusk, her expression doing something he could not entirely read from the distance, something that moved through several stages in the moment he observed it. Whatever it was settled into something sharper than her earlier attention, the look of someone reassessing, in real time, what she had just watched. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the river. Then she got up and came toward him along the bank, and when she reached him she looked at Dusk, who had not moved, who was still pressed against his shoulder with her amber eyes on the water, and Braka crouched beside them both and was quiet for a while. "I was going to leave today," she said finally. "Yes," he said. She looked at him with the same directness she'd brought to him since the fire. "I am going to stay longer," she said. "There are things I want to show you. If you want them." He looked at her. He said yes. She nodded once, with the decisiveness of someone closing a decision that had already been made and needed only this final confirmation. Then she reached out and rested one hand briefly on Dusk's shoulder, not directing, simply acknowledging, the touch that said, "I see this and it is right," and stood up. "We will start after you eat," she said. She walked back toward the settlement. Dusk remained beside Can for a few minutes longer, the warmth and the weight of her and the deep idle engine sound, and then she rose and followed Braka without looking back, and Can sat alone at the river with the early light coming fully into the world, and understood that something had changed and was continuing to change, and that the change was going to require everything he had learned how to be. Sira ASHWALLOW noticed. She noticed in the way that Sira noticed things, without announcing the noticing, filing it in the careful internal arrangement she maintained for information she considered relevant, drawing her own conclusions at her own pace without consultation. She saw Braka at the communal meals on the second day, and the third. She saw her moving with Can through the settlement's edges in the early mornings, before most of the camp was active, Dusk ranging ahead of them. She heard the sound of the gun being fired in the hill country south of the settlement on the second afternoon. A flat, sharp crack that bounced off the red stone formations and reached the settlement with the clarity of something that cut through ambient sound, and looked up from her work and then returned to it. Musapur asked her on the fourth day, in the way he asked things that he had already largely understood. "How long is she staying?" "I have not asked," Sira said. Musapur was quiet for a moment. "Then, your son went to the river this morning with the cat beside him." "I know," she said. And he said nothing more, and she said nothing more, and they returned to their respective work. And the question of Braka Windtrail's continued presence in Camp Narache was left where it was, which was in the category of things that were happening as they were supposed to happen and did not require anyone to intervene. The gun came first because Braka said it should. She explained this standing in the open hill country south of the settlement on the first morning of instruction, the two of them facing the low red stone formations that provided natural backstops. Dusk ranging the area at a distance with the independent patrol she conducted wherever they were. "A Tauren hunter's weapon is the gun," Braka said. "This is the first thing. Not the bow belongs to other races who developed it, and who use it with centuries of specific practice behind them. The gun is yours by nature of what you are. It does not require you to be something other than a Tauren to use it correctly." She unslung the rifle from her back. It was a practical weapon, not ornate, not decorated, the wood of the stock worn smooth by years of handling, and the metal maintained to a working standard, every surface functional rather than beautiful. She held it with the ease of something she had been holding for so long. The holding had become part of her body's natural posture. "This is what it does," she said and demonstrated. The sound of the shot was enormous in the open country. A flat crack that expanded outward and bounced off the stone formations and took a moment to fully dissipate. And then the hills were quiet again, and the target she had set against the near formation had a hole in it at the exact center of where she had aimed. Can stood beside her and felt the sound in his chest and said nothing. She showed him the mechanism, how the shot was loaded, the specific motion, the specific pressure, the specific sequence that had to be correct every time without variation. How the weapon was held, the stock against the shoulder in exactly this position, the cheek against the wood in exactly this way, because the kick of firing was real and would punish incorrect positioning with a specificity that correct positioning did not allow. How to breathe when aiming, not holding the breath, which created tremor, but the controlled exhale that produced the window of stillness between breaths where the shot should go. She was precise and direct in the instruction, as she was in everything. She showed him something once and then had him replicate it, correcting the replication with specific language, then had him replicate it again. She did not praise correct execution. She simply moved to the next element, which was its own form of acknowledgement. He took the first shot on the second morning, after a full day of handling the weapon without ammunition, learning its weight and balance and the way it wanted to be held. The shot went wide of the target, considerably wide enough that he understood immediately how much he did not know. And the kick surprised him despite being told about it, and his shoulder registered its opinion about the position he had placed it in. "Good," Braka said. "Now you know what it actually is rather than what you thought it was. That is the beginning." He came back the following morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that, and the shots moved progressively toward where he was pointing them with the incremental improvement of a skill being built correctly from its foundation, rather than rushed toward its application. The axe came next because Braka said the axe was the weapon most likely to save his life in situations where the gun could not. She watched him swing it first, standing back with her arms crossed and the assessing expression she wore when she was reading something. "You have the strength," she said. "You have had the strength for some time. Strength is not the problem." She took the axe from him and held it for a moment, feeling it, and then she moved with it in a sequence that lasted perhaps 15 seconds, and left the air feeling different in some way he could not immediately account for. It was not aggressive, she was not demonstrating how to attack. She was demonstrating how to move, how the body and the weapon became a single system when the technique was correct, how the axe was an extension of the body's natural lines of force rather than something added to them. You are swinging from the arm, she said. The arm has limits. The body does not have the same limits. She showed him the difference. The same motion, first arm only, then body-driven. The distinction immediate and clear in terms of both the speed and the sound of the impact on the practice post she had set up. When you swing from the arm, she said, you are using a fraction of what is available to you. When you swing from the body, you are not adding the body's power to the arm's power. You are replacing the arm's power entirely with something larger. He practiced the motion without the axe first, which he had not expected but understood immediately as correct. The technique needed to live in the body before the weapon was added to it, or the weapon would continue to be the thing he was thinking about rather than the body that drove it. He practiced the motion for 2 days without the axe, until it was no longer a technique he was executing but a way his body moved, and then Braka returned the axe to him and watched and said, "Better. Now we will work on when to use it." The staff technique was different from the axe, not stronger, not weaker, but operating on different principles, the length of the staff changing the geometry of engagement in ways the shorter weapon did not. Braka showed him how the staff could be used to control distance, which was a concept his mother had introduced, but which Braka developed into a full tactical vocabulary. How to maintain the range advantage, how to transition from range control to close engagement when the range was lost, how to use the staff's length as both weapon and shield in the same movement, how to transition between offense and defense without the pause that telegraphed the transition to an opponent. She showed him to fight with his hands and feet because she said, "There will be moments when everything else is gone and your body is what remains, and on those moments you need to know what your body can do." She was matter-of-fact about this as she was about everything. She showed him how a Tauren's natural mass, the size and density that was simply what Tauren were, could be deployed intelligently rather than merely exerted. How to fall without being damaged by the falling. How to break a grip. How to strike with the elbow, which was a harder and more controllable surface than the fist and which, deployed correctly, ended conversations efficiently. She sparred with him at reduced intensity and corrected his instincts when they were wrong, and his instincts were wrong often enough in the early days that the corrections were frequent, and the frequency was itself instructive. "You fight as though you are trying not to hurt your opponent," she said after the 3rd session. He considered this. "Is that wrong?" he asked. "In practice, no," she said. "In the field, it will get you killed." She looked at him with the directness she brought to everything. "You are not cruel. This is not a criticism. But there is a difference between choosing not to hurt something and being incapable of it when it is necessary. You need to be capable of it. The choosing not to remains yours." The beast mastery instruction came in pieces, woven between the weapon work and the evenings at the fire and the mornings at the river, because Braka said the beast mastery was not a subject with a beginning and an end, but a practice that ran alongside everything else and informed everything else, and was most effectively learned that way. She began with the most fundamental thing, which she said was also the most commonly neglected: how to feed a companion. Not feeding as in providing food. She said most hunters understood that much, but feeding as relationship, feeding as communication. Different animals had different needs, and understanding those needs specifically rather than generally was the beginning of understanding the animal specifically rather than generally, which was the beginning of the bond rather than the imitation of the bond. Dusk, for example, preferred certain cuts over others, and not simply because of flavor. The preference told you something about the animal's history, what its body had learned to expect, what it associated with safety and satisfaction. An animal fed correctly, fed with attention to what it actually needed rather than what was convenient to provide, was an animal that understood you had seen it. And an animal that understood you had seen it was an animal beginning to consider whether you were worth seeing in return. She showed him how to read a companion's state. The ears, their angle and mobility communicated volumes, each position a specific message if you knew the vocabulary. The tail, more expressive in cats than in most animals, a continuous broadcast of inner weather if you could read the frequency. The breathing, not just the rate but the character, the difference between relaxed alert and tense alert and the various grades of both. The way the body was held in the moment before a decision was made, the specific set of the shoulders and haunches that preceded different kinds of movement. She showed him how to mend a wounded companion in the field. This was partly the first aid his mother had taught him, applied to a different kind of body, and partly something else entirely. Something that required not just technical competence, but the management of trust under the most difficult conditions in which trust was tested, which was when the animal was in pain and frightened, and the person it needed to trust was the person touching the source of its pain. "You must be calmer than the animal needs you to be," Braka said. "Not performing calm, actually calmer. The animal will read your body's state more accurately than you can manage it, and if you are afraid for it or frustrated by it or urgent about it, it will feel that, and it will be less able to accept what you are doing. The technique is secondary to the state you bring to the technique." She can practice on Dusk minor treatments, the checking of the paws for stones and debris, the examination of the ears for irritation, the inspection of the coat for parasites or wounds. Dusk submitted to this with the resigned patience of an animal accustomed to being examined, and then with something less resigned, something closer to real acceptance. As Can's hands learned the geography of her body, and Dusk learned that his hands were hands that paid attention and did not rush and could be trusted to stop when stopping was indicated. "You have good hands for this," Braka said, watching. "She means that as a significant observation." She showed him how to command a companion in combat, not with words which were too slow and too loud, but with positioning and intent, the way you placed your own body communicating to the companion what you needed it to do, the way the companion read your attention and moved to cover what your attention was pointed away from. This required the same kind of bond that she and Dusk demonstrated, the mutual awareness, the shared coverage of angles, and could not be fully replicated in 2 weeks. But the principles could be given, and the principles could be practiced, and the practicing would build what time was required to build if the foundation was correct. The foundation, she said, was seeing the animal as it actually was rather than as you wanted it to be. This was the same instruction Can would encounter again and again from different directions across the years. The obligation to perceive accurately rather than conveniently. But the first time he heard it applied specifically to the relationship between a hunter and a companion. It landed with the weight of something he had been approaching from the outside and had now stepped inside of. Tamer watched all of this with the attention she brought to things she found genuinely interesting, which meant she watched it with complete attention, which meant she was frequently present at the edges of the instruction sessions in the way she was frequently present at the edges of anything that involved Can and mattered. On the 7th day, she appeared at his side in the late afternoon when Braka was elsewhere and said, without preliminary, "You are different." He looked at her. "Not bad different," she said, with the clarifying precision she deployed when she thought her meaning might be misunderstood. "Just different, like something that was pointing in a direction has been given a clearer view of what is in that direction." She looked at the gun he was maintaining, which had become his evening routine, disassembly, cleaning, reassembly, the specific sequence Braka had given him for keeping the mechanism reliable in field conditions. "It is good," she said. "The different. I just wanted you to know I can see it." He said, "She is going to leave in another week." "I know," Tamer said. She picked up a piece of the cleaning equipment and turned it in her hands without knowing its purpose, which she would have found irrelevant. "Will you be ready?" "For what?" She looked at him with the expression she wore when she was saying something she considered obvious. "For the road," she said. "For whenever you go. You will be more ready than you were before she came, which is the point of her being here." She paused and then said, with the directness most consistent in her speech, "I think she came here because she was supposed to." I think Dusk knew it before Braka did. He did not have a response to this. Tamer set down the cleaning equipment and stood up and looked at the hills to the south, where the red stone formations were catching the late light. Then she said, not looking at him, "When you go, you should go knowing that this place and the people in it will still be here. Including me." She said this with a quietness that was unusual for her, a deliberate lowering of her usual volume that made it more rather than less noticeable. "It is not a reason to stay. I am not saying that. I am saying it is not a reason to worry." He looked at her profile against the afternoon light, and felt the specific weight of what she had just said, and the specific weight of what she had not said, and understood that both were gifts, and that the not saying was the larger one. Braka left on the morning of the 14th day. She was packed and ready before dawn, which Can had expected. Experienced travelers did not linger in departures, and 14 days was already more than she had planned to give, and there was a life on the road that did not stop requiring attention simply because she had paused it. She handed him the gun the previous evening. Not her own hunting rifle, that was hers and part of her, and would be until she had no further use for it, but a weapon she had been carrying as a spare, simple and reliable and well-maintained. A short-barreled hunting piece with a balance that suited a younger hunter, still developing the specific muscle structures that heavier weapons demanded. With it, a bag of shot and a horn of powder, and the specific maintenance tools he would need to keep it functional in the field. "Learn it the way you learn the rest," she said, with patience and without rushing toward the application before the foundation is ready. He accepted it with both hands and held it with the attention it deserved. She looked at him for a moment in the lamplight of that last evening, with the frank assessment that had characterized her attention throughout, and said, "You have good instincts. Better than good. Dusk chose you on the second morning. I want you to understand what that means, because you will encounter animals on the road, and you need to know that what happened at the river is not ordinary. I have taken many students over the years. Dusk has never done that before." She did not elaborate on what it meant. She left the meaning in the space between the sentences, which he would have time to fill. In the morning, she and Dusk moved through Camp Narache toward the eastern path, while most of the settlement was still deciding whether to get up. And Can watched them go with the gun in his hands, and the bag of shot at his hip, and everything Braka had given him settled now through his body and his mind, the whole new arrangement of what he was, and what he was working toward. Tamer appeared at his elbow without sound, which was unusual for her. She said, "Well." He said, "Yes." They watched the place where the grass had closed behind Braka and Dusk for a while. Then Tamer said, "She knew you were worth 2 weeks from the second day. She had planned to stay 2 nights. She is a hunter who has been moving for 30 years, and she changed her plans because of what she saw at the river. Think about that when you are uncertain about what you are." He looked at Tamer. She was looking at the grass rather than at him, her jaw set with the particular expression she wore when she was saying something she had been thinking about for a while and had now decided to say. "Think about it," she said again. And then she walked back toward the settlement without waiting for his response, because Tamer had always understood that some things did not require a response and were only diminished by one. The 2 years that followed were the years of building. He practiced every morning before dawn, the gun in the open hill country south of the settlement, the shots moving with the incremental but consistent improvement of something being built correctly, the target growing more predictable, the kick becoming familiar, the breathing pattern becoming automatic. He practiced the axe technique in the afternoons. The body-driven swing Braka had shown him becoming gradually less a technique he was executing, and more a way his body moved when it had a specific intention. He practiced the staff in the evenings, the longer weapon's geometry becoming part of how he read the space around him. He worked his crafts with the same systematic attention. His leatherworking developed from competent to skilled, producing pieces that Roke assessed occasionally with the frank honesty of a craftsperson who had no investment in flattery, and the assessments moved in one direction. He cooked with increasing specificity, not just meals but preparations with particular effects, learning through careful observation which combinations produced which results in his own body, and extrapolating with reasonable accuracy to other bodies. He fished with the vocabulary of water that Braka's river reading had added to his own, catching things he had not previously caught in water he had previously considered familiar. He sold everything beyond his own needs. He kept accounts with the care of someone who understood that money was not an end, but an instrument, a means of acquiring the capabilities he did not yet have, the training from people who had things he could not learn from the hills and the river. He was, in these 2 years, assembling himself, not hurrying, not performing urgency, building the way the fish built its position behind the river stone, patient, positioned, letting the world bring what the world brought while using the time of waiting to become more completely ready for the arrival. Before she left, Braka had given him something beyond the physical instruction, a map of where to go next. "There is a hunter trainer on Red Cloud Mesa," she had said on one of their last evenings together. "Lanka Farshot. Not far from here. She trains the early abilities, the foundational work that everything else is built on. Go to her after I have gone. Pay respect. Learn what she can teach." She had told him also about Thota in Bloodhoof Village, who trained hunters to a higher level than Lanka Farshot could, and about Raban Freerunner, who worked with hunters specifically on the relationship between a hunter and a companion animal. "Go to both," she said. "Lanka Farshot first, then Thota and Raban when you are ready to make the road. These are not optional courtesies. They are part of the preparation. Do not go north without them." He went to Lanka Farshot 3 weeks after Braka left, on a morning when the air was still carrying summer, but the light had begun its autumn adjustment, the angle of it changing in the way that changed everything it touched. Red Cloud Mesa was a morning's walk from Camp Narache, as Braka had said, and he made it alone, with his gun and his pack, and the sense of someone on their first deliberate journey towards something that mattered. Lanka Farshot was a lean, older Tauran female who ran her instruction from inside the largest tent on Red Cloud Mesa, with the practical directness of someone who took the teaching seriously, without taking herself seriously, which was a combination Khan recognized and respected. She gave him a quick, practical read, gauging how much he already knew before deciding where to begin, asked him several questions that were themselves a form of evaluation, and then began. She taught him the foundations. Not the advanced work, she was clear about the limits of what she could give him, and the clarity was itself a form of honesty that he appreciated. She taught him the specific techniques of gun handling in field conditions, the breath control that Braka had given him in its raw form, here given its formal structure. She taught him the use of a hunter's mark, how to identify a target precisely and communicate that precision to a companion animal, which was the first formal vocabulary of the hunter and companion relationship. She taught him the specific awareness that a hunter needed to maintain of the space between himself and whatever he was engaging, the distance management that kept the hunter in the position of advantage rather than disadvantage. She taught him the care of a companion animal in broad terms, what a hunter was responsible for, what the animal needed that was different from what a working animal or a pet needed. She had no companion of her own present during his instruction, but she spoke of the relationship with the specificity of someone who had held it for years and understood it in the way that long practice produced understanding. He spent 4 days on Red Cloud Mesa, sleeping under the open sky and eating from his own supplies, and returning to Lanka Farshot each morning with the questions that the previous day's instruction had generated. On the 4th day, she told him he had what she had to give him, and he thanked her with the genuine directness he brought to all gratitude, and she nodded once with the satisfaction of a craftsperson whose work had been received properly, and he walked back to Camp Narache. He told Tamer about it at the river the following morning. She listened with the focused attention she gave to things that genuinely interested her, and then said, "So there is a map of people to find, and each one gives you a piece of the thing you are building." "Yes," he said. She held her silence a moment. "Then that is a good way to build something." She looked at the water. "You can always find the next person, even when you cannot see the whole shape yet." He thought about this for a while. Then he said, "Braka is one of the pieces." The first piece, Tamer said, with the certainty she brought to true things. "And the one that told you there were other pieces." She paused and then added, with the slight shift in tone that indicated she was saying something she had been thinking about rather than something she was thinking of now. "I think she found you exactly when you were ready to be found." "Not before." She looked at him with the direct brown eyes. "That is not an accident. That is the world working correctly." He did not have a response to this that was adequate to what it was, so he said nothing, which Tamer accepted with the nod that meant she understood that his silence was its own kind of agreement. Jiro's bow hung on the wall. He looked at it sometimes in the way he had always looked at it. The question attached to it had not changed. His understanding of what he intended to do about the question had not fully formed. But something in the 2 years of building had clarified the understanding that he would eventually go to find the answer, and that when he went, he would go capable of taking care of himself in the going, which was the foundation his mother had told him mattered most, and which he was now, finally, beginning to have. Tamer was at the river most mornings, still talking, still saying the things other people thought and did not say, still making him laugh in the way that only the people who genuinely knew you could make you laugh, targeting the exact gap in his composure with the accuracy that required genuine knowledge of where the gap was. On the morning of his 17th birthday, she came to the river before dawn and sat beside him and said, "This is the last one." He looked at her. "Your last birthday here," she said. She said it with the directness she always said true things, without softening and without apology, and without any indication that she expected him to argue with it because she knew he would not. "Next year you will be somewhere else." She paused. "I am not saying this to be sad about it. I am saying it so you know I know it, and so you know it is all right." He looked at the river for a long time. Then he said, "I know." She nodded. They watched the water. The light came into the world in the way it always came, indifferent to anniversaries, and the fish moved when the angle was right, and the morning went on being the morning. From the thoughts of Camp ASHWALLOW.
She stayed 2 weeks. She had planned to stay 2 nights. I have been thinking about the distance between those 2 numbers, 2 nights and 2 weeks, and what lives in that distance. 2 nights is the standard hospitality of a communal fire. You eat, you tell your stories, you sleep, you continue your road. Experienced travelers do not linger. The road has its own requirements, and those requirements do not pause because a particular fire was warm. She stayed 12 additional days because of what she saw at the river on the second morning. Because Dusk went to a stranger and pressed her head against his shoulder and stayed. I have watched Dusk at the river many times since then, in the mornings before Braka woke, learning her patterns the way I learn all patterns, through sustained attention rather than deliberate study. She does not go to people. She assesses people continuously and with genuine seriousness, and she finds most of them either irrelevant or worth monitoring, and occasionally worth moving away from. And she manages all of these assessments with the amber-eyed patience that is simply how she exists in the world. She does not go to people. She came to me. I do not know what this means in any final sense. I know that Braka said it was not ordinary. I know that Braka changed her plans because of it, and Braka is not a person who changes plans lightly. She has been moving through the world for 30 years with the efficiency of someone who has learned that wasted motion is wasted life. She gave me 2 weeks because she saw something worth giving 2 weeks to. The gun is learning my hands. I clean it every evening and take it to the hills every morning, and the target is becoming more predictable, which means I am becoming more predictable to myself, which is the point. Braka told me the gun asks questions, and the questions are patient. I have 2 years of answering them before I go north. The axe and the staff are also learning my hands, in the way that things learn hands when hands give them enough honest daily attention. I think about what Braka said about the bond, that it grows rather than being built, that you make yourself the right ground. I think about this when I practice. I think about this when I look at my father's bow on the wall. I think about this when I sit beside Tama at the river, and she says the things she says, and I feel the specific warmth of her company, and understand that whatever this is between us has also been growing without either of us building it, and that its nature is something neither of us has yet fully named, and that the not naming may be its own form of respect for what it is. Next year, I will be somewhere else. She knows this. She said it out loud so I would know she knew it. That is the most Tama thing she has ever done, which is saying a great deal. Camp ASHWALLOW.